Well, hello and welcome. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here with my friend, colleague, and co-host, Jeff Otis. And you may have seen a previous episode. What Jeff and I are doing is bringing a combined 30 times two, I guess, Jeff, 60 years of experience in the leadership space. And we've been talking about leadership so long, a couple years now of friendship and collaboration that we just thought maybe we could distill some of this topically and just make it more easily digestible for people because leadership's a big deal. I personally don't think that there are a lot of great leaders out there, Jeff. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. So anything we can do to help people that are aspiring to be leaders or are in leadership positions now that want to get better, with all humility, I think we have an obligation to do that. So that's what this is about. And we're trying to keep these, 10 to 15 minutes so you can watch them quick on, maybe one and a half speed, knock them out while you're on the treadmill or something. But I think this is a compilation of what we've learned and what we've made mistakes with, and things that have worked for us over the years. So I think this is number 8 in terms of episodes. And what we're going to talk about today is something that I don't think any leader wants to talk about or wants to be a part of, but it's a stark reality of being a leader. And that is the art or the graceful activity of terminating an employee. And so we did a little bit of pregame talk, Jeff and I did, but I just got flooded with stories because it's the worst thing I've ever had to do as an employer is let somebody go. And Jeff, I think you feel the same way. So I'll pass it over to you, but let's talk about how to terminate somebody, I guess with grace and hopefully by allowing whoever it is that you're terminating to retain his or her dignity. What do you think, Jeff?
It's yeah, it's not a subject everybody wants to talk to, but it's a reality when you're responsible for leading teams and growing teams and performance. And, sometimes you need to make changes. I remember a very wise boss years ago telling me, he's like, look, the day you enjoy terminating somebody is the day you should quit being a leader.
Hmm.
Right. Like it's not a natural human instinct to walk in and sort of communicate to somebody that they're no longer a fit, right?
Hmm.
And I know I can remember lots of sleepless nights, before knowing that I was walking in to terminate somebody the following morning. I've coached just all sorts of team leaders and people who've kind of been in the same situation. And yeah, like you just said, the reality is it's something that needs to be done. And at the same point, you never want to strip somebody of their dignity, right? Like just because you terminate somebody doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think one of the things that I try and do is say, look, I selected a certain way of doing this, and in my experience, much like yours, I think was staffing, right? Recruiting people on behalf of clients and finding candidates and putting them in positions. There's 100 different ways to do this. I've chosen this way. This is the system that works for me. It's the system I flourished in. Doesn't mean it's the system that works for you. So I think what we found here over the course of the first 60 or 90 days or whatever the circumstances are is that I got a system that doesn't work for you, but it works for me. That doesn't speak to your character. It doesn't speak to your capability. It doesn't speak to anything other than I think it'd probably be best for you and me if you found another system if you want to stay in this business because there are plenty out there, and mine is not the only one. So that kind of distances me from it's true and it's I think it's generous, but it's another way that I had to help somebody maintain their dignity because it is. It's not the way I do things is not the way for everyone to do things for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think, when you look at your responsibility as a leader, you're responsible for an entire team. And I always came from the philosophy that terminating somebody should never be a surprise, right? Like on a daily or weekly basis, at minimum, people should have a good idea of where they stand within the organization.
Mhm.
I think as a leader, it's also your responsibility to develop metrics and measurements for performance and like how are we actually kind of grading the suitability of an employee in our organization. And I think that's the foundation for being able to make some of those decisions.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
know that often when team members see you sort of delay in making those changes, it can also start to degrade or, impact the entire culture of a team. So I
Yeah, yeah, that's a
it's
great
tough.
point. Yeah, it's a great point. I think that whether it's a bad attitude or a lack of performance, the negative undercurrents can infect your culture and your environment very quickly. So I think it's a really good point that this isn't just about someone's individual performance. It's about you standing up in front of your whole team or your whole company saying, we're not going to tolerate this level of performance. So, that's in support of our mission here to be a productive organization serving our community, whatever that might mean. So, yeah, if you sit on people, it poisons everyone else. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Well, and and when you do make the decision that now, hey, we've got to make a change here, terminate somebody, I think was also is equally important, beyond having those measurements is your documentation, right? Like, as you're leading a team, I mean, you should be documenting along the way how people are performing, but especially when you come to the decision that you're going to make a change, the best for, I mean, I think the first thing you do is like document all your reasons why, like get them
Mhm.
down on paper and sort of reflect on them and say, am I really making the right change here? Or is this, am I reading it something into this that I shouldn't be reading into this? Sometimes you have a very top performer that might have a bad month or two because of something personal going on in their life. Like you got to take the time to explore and get that down to sort of reassure yourself you're making that right decision. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think what you're talking about there is context. You're contextualizing your decision that it's not a within a 30-day time frame or a 90-day it's overall. It takes all these different things into consideration. The other thing that struck me as you were talking is, where does this begin? How did I end up having someone on my payroll that I have to terminate? And when I ask myself that question, it goes all the way back to the interview process, the selection process, the what is the ideal person to welcome into my culture to do this work the way we want to do this work. And I think, speaking from experience, I don't know how you feel, but I think all of us, even us as staffing executives and supposed experts, we get to the interview process and we relax a little bit because nobody likes interviewing candidates. Nobody likes looking at resumes. It's a pain in the ass. It takes too long. And before long, and I've made this mistake quite a few times, I take someone in that is, okay, that's acceptable. And I lower the bar to take a little bit of pressure off myself and I let somebody sneak in. Very infrequently, Jeff, in my experience, do those people work out. You got to keep that bar high, that standard high in the selection process, even when it gets really tedious, difficult, and monotonous. I don't know what your experience with that is.
Oh, absolutely. We, there was a time when I was leading a digital advertising company, and we got to the point where, look, we're not hiring anybody unless they had a 3.8 or higher, because we needed the critical thinking and the complexities to stay up with the speed at which the internet was hiring. Every time we went below that sort of criterion, we ended up, almost every time ended up having to make a termination decision somewhere down the road.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was difficult to hold that bar high, especially when you feel desperate, like I need to hire somebody now.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
I
Well, I
think
think
if you're feeling that desperation, it's still better to pause for a little bit and continue to look, continue to protect those sort of expectations of the organization.
Yeah, and I think it also opens up a little bit of a can of worms for me in that I spent most of my career as an employer, as a business owner. I didn't pay attention to where people went to school. I didn't pay attention to what degree they had. I didn't even care if they graduated as long as there was a story. And I'll give you an example. Hey, why didn't you finish college? I see you got 2.5 years in. Yeah, I got kind of tired of things. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. And, I figured I'm wasting my time and money. So I moved on to something else. Have a nice day. Nice talking to you. Right. Versus, at 2.5 years, my mom called and said, dad was not going to be long. We had a family business. Dad passed away and I had to go home and help mom with the business. And we were able to turn things around, but I wasn't able to complete my degree. When can you start? right? So it's like the context of someone's background is important. And the second piece of that, Jeff, for me is I wasn't hiring in that space the same person that you're talking about. I was hiring a different kind of person. So I
Yep.
think that the type of interview that you do has to align with the kind of person that you need. And as obvious as that sounds, sometimes I think people interview 18 different skill sets in the same fashion, right?
Right.
Like this is how you interview people. These are the questions to ask. I'm like, not for a chemical engineer versus a sales rep, it's different. So anyway,
Well, every role in an organization has different responsibilities tied to it, right? Like, so what you're looking for is the individual to be able to perform to the role and what's needed. And when you have to end up, like you said, make that tough decision to terminate somebody, it's not easy. Nobody should enjoy it. Fundamentally, you still need to do it. Um, but when it comes down to that, I mean, what are some tips from you that you've experienced just in terms of preparing for that? For preparing to walk into that room at 8 a.m. on a Monday and let somebody know uh, it's their last moment.
yeah, well, I go back to what you said about the sleepless nights. I've had a few myself. I think just accepting the reality is kind of an important exercise for me. It's like you don't go into that room doubting what you're going to do. You go into that room with a level of certainty because in my experience, Jeff, some people, maybe most people, as soon as they hear the news, even though they may not be surprised by it, they start to defend themselves. They start to make a case. They start to apologize. They start to make excuses. It's human nature. And if you don't have the resolve to say, no matter what this person says, I got all the metrics, I've watched things for the last 90 days, last year, whatever, this is the right decision to make. And I'm walking into that room with the proper resolve. I'm not going to move off of my position because as soon as you move off of your position, it becomes a cluster in my experience. That meeting just falls apart and gets nasty and silly and a
Yeah.
waste of time. And you mentioned it earlier. The other piece is the metrics. Do you have the data? Is the data clear? Is it concise? Does it support your position? As a matter of fact, is it crystal clear that when we lay the data out here, we really should just wish each other well and end this discussion now and move on? And so it's kind of a mental exercise, but there's also a concrete, factual data piece to it as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think another good tip is to also, if you're in a situation where you can, lean on other sort of nonpartisan uh, minds, right? Like somebody else who can look at it with clear objective and say, yes, I agree, you're making the right decision.
Hmm.
Um, or no, you don't, you aren't, have you considered X, Y, or Z?
Hmm.
I mean, there's been times when I have gotten to the point where, I'm ready to terminate and remove somebody from a team, where when I paused for a day, wrote down the facts, really looked at this individual's unique strengths and came to the conclusion of, well, maybe we can shift those strengths actually to a different department where this person can flourish. Maybe they're just not comfortable in where we had them. And,
Yeah.
we try that sometimes, and sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't.
No,
But
I think that's gracious. I think that I didn't really have the opportunity to move people from one position into another. I had recruiters and salespeople, and my operations staff was one or two people. There wasn't any room.
right.
Um, and moving from recruiter to sales rep or sales rep to recruiter, you're still doing the same job in my mind. Like 90% of the job is the same. You have to talk to people, you have to be good with people, you have to, it's the same role. So I didn't have the same opportunity, but good for you. If there's other opportunities for that person internally, a person of good character with a good work ethic, you do have to try and find them a spot if you have the opportunity to do that. I would agree.
Yeah, I think so too. And then I think when you get down, when if you do actually get to the spot where you need to terminate somebody and you're going into that conversation, like you said earlier, is it can't turn into a two-way conversation back and forth with you trying to defend your justifications and so forth. I mean, it's
Mhm.
Oregon's an at-will state for where we are, and
Yeah.
you can make that decision anytime. And you really don't have to come with a boatload of reasons for that decision. And
Right.
I think you actually do yourself more damage if you're communicating the reasons for the decisions. You're opening up an organization, for potential liabilities if you
Total, yeah,
say
total
one
can of
thing wrong.
worms.
So,
Yeah, total can of worms. I think the other thing that pops into my head about that is, and I didn't used to pay attention to this, 20, 30 years ago, like I probably would now, is to have an objective third party in the room with you, to not expose yourself to liability. And we live in such a litigious society now, more so than ever in my lifetime, that I think there's probably a protectionist measure or two that you could take, just so it didn't become a he said, she said conversation. It was more of a black and white conversation. And so, and I can't resist the temptation to go back to what you said at the beginning about, the day you wake up and feel like you're enjoying terminating people is the day you should stop being a leader. I've bounced that off people my whole career. Like, man, I hang on to people too long. And
yeah,
most of the people that were friends of mine said the same thing. Mark, that just means you're not a dick. It means
yeah,
you're not an asshole. So I was like,
yeah. No, it's
okay,
true.
I'll take that.
Well, we believe it. Look, we're optimistic people. We believe in people. We're in the business of growing people as leaders. I mean, that's what we do for a living, right? So we tend to be good humans and try to make good decisions and try to bring out the best in people, and we have a lot of hope for people, and so sometimes we do hang on to them longer than we need, and sometimes that's to the detriment of the team as a whole. Um, and I think over time, the more you're in these situations, the more you start to realize that we should probably rip off the band-aids sooner than later. And
Yeah,
we can
yeah.
still do it gracefully. We can still leave a person with their dignity. I remember terminating people and actually helping them find their next job, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
still
Oh yeah.
being a good reference for them. And like I said, it doesn't mean they're a bad person, but you still got to make those changes sometimes.
Yeah, I think doing the right thing in that area. I mean, if you're a really good leader, then you're gonna face this issue of having to terminate somebody, because it doesn't even mean that people slip through the cracks of the interview process. Just sometimes it's just circumstantial change. It could be macroeconomic, it could be a family issue, it could be a physical ailment issue, it could be I've had people had to relocate because their spouse got a job doing something else. I mean, it's so many things are beyond your control that I think you just have to be prepared that this is a reality of the job of being a really good leader. And you can do this really well and honestly and openly and with grace, or you can be a dick, but I
Yep.
don't think being a dick is a long-term play. I think that's a short-term play.
Yeah, one other piece of advice I remember was passed down to me years ago is just this concept of, look, at some point, everybody leaves an organization,
Hmm.
right? They either quit, they're terminated, or they pass away. Like, what else happens, right? And so when you start to kind of look through that filter and say, all right, well, the organization is almost like its own entity. It needs to keep growing and it needs to keep evolving, um, and change is good for that organization sometimes.
Yeah, I think I just had one memory that kind of struck me, and I got a couple of them, couple of stories I'll leave on the table because they're probably a little bit more R-rated than I want to choose to be here. But I remember one young lady coming. I brought her in as I was way beyond time to go. I consulted with my couple of my colleagues, my partner. Everybody was in agreement, and I'll never forget this. I don't remember her name, but I can see her face, and she said, I was just starting to take the job seriously. Think about that for a second. Like, why don't you just go like this and flip me the bird? I was so shocked. I remember I didn't know what to say. And
Yeah,
I got a little flustered. I'm like, you're doing exactly what I'm trying to do with you right now. Is like that statement alone means I should have fired you last month, you know?
right.
But so that's just one tiny story, Jeff, and I bet you got about 1,000 of them.
Yeah,
As difficult as it is, if we had them all on videotape, we could probably make a pretty good sitcom out of the whole thing, I would imagine. But I think, to wrap it up, I think that it's a reality of the job if you're going to be a leader. You got to get some resolve about it. You have to get some objectivity about it. You have to walk into these situations with data and metrics. And frankly, you have to have a system in place to support productive behavior before you get to the point of terminating someone, because here's the bar and here's acceptable and here's unacceptable. And then you had mentioned earlier, yeah, the annual review thing I think is a lazy way out. I think you really have to be in a situation, ideally in my estimation, where no one's surprised about any particular day because they knew what was going on yesterday and the day before. And if you have holes in that, if people don't know what's going on or don't know how they're performing, I think that's a systemic issue that can be fixed with relative ease.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we alluded to it earlier, is terminate. It should never be a surprise for somebody.
Yep.
It should never, like, there should have already been conversations, already metrics in place, already an indication and understanding of how a person's performing in the organization. It just shouldn't come as a surprise. And these great leaders keep that conversation going all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And but there still comes a moment sometimes when you got to make that tough decision. So
Yeah, yeah, and again, I think the takeaway is if you're no matter who you are, if you're aspiring to lead or you're in a position of leadership, if you're not 100% sure, just step away from this conversation and check your metrics. Do you have the ability to go with relative ease to a very simple data set and be able to say, nope, this person belongs or this person doesn't? And I think most of us, there's probably room for improvement for most of us in that exercise. So that would be a recommendation of mine because I think it makes everything else that you may have to do later easier.
yeah. And the only other recommendation I'd add is don't forget you're dealing with humans,
Yeah,
right? It doesn't take a lot of talent to be a good human yourself, and you know, avoid stripping somebody of their dignity in the process.
man, couldn't have said it better myself. We're done with that, Jeff. Good job.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. See you.